Dean Rusk disagrees with you, and he was the Secretary of State at the time, but that's fine.
The communist nations have exploited the turmoil of a time of transition in an effort to extend communist control into other areas of the world.
Thoughts on Dean Rusk and America's involvement in Vietnam? I know next to nothing about that.
Exactly. "10 years after the attacks, many independent researchers claim World Trade Center Building 7 remains the smoking gun from September 11th. The 47-floor high-rise took up a full city block just north of the main WTC complex, the Tower, completed in 1987. Contained nearly 2 million square feet of floor space, or roughly three-quarters of that, in the 102-story Empire State Building. Some of those floors housed high-profile tenants, the offices of the Secret Service, Central Intelligence Agency, Department of Defense, Internal Revenue Service, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the city's Office of Emergency Management. No plane struck the building on 9/11 at 5:20 p.m., 7.5 hours after the collapse of the South Tower, and 7 hours after the collapse of the North Tower. Building 7 plunged to the ground. FEMA released a building performance study 8 months later that focused on long-burning fires as the cause of collapse. WTC 7, investigators pointed out, housed 5 storage tanks containing some 42,000 gallons of diesel fuel that could power 14 backup generators located throughout the building. That fuel, they speculated, might have fed the flames long enough for them to weaken the building's steel structure. The report noted, however, the specifics of the fires in WTC 7 and how they caused the building to collapse remain unknown at this time. Although the total diesel fuel on the premises contained massive potential energy, the best hypothesis has only a low probability of occurrence. In June 2004, NIST released a progress report that modified those findings and hypothesized that WTC 7 was far more compromised by debris from the destruction of Tower 1, about 300 feet away, than FEMA's report indicated. NIST discovered previously undocumented damage to WTC 7's upper stories and its southwest corner. Writing at the time, the south face of WTC 7 was obscured by smoke, making direct observation of damage from photographs or videos difficult or impossible. Large fires were burning in WTC 5 and WTC 6, as well as those noted in WTC 7. In other words, in the many photographs taken of the area following the attacks, a primary source in the FEMA report, the structure of WTC 7 is simply not visible. One of the few clear photographs, which was taken by the New York City Police Department, reveals that the exterior damage from debris to the building was indeed severe. After that update, NIST's investigative team was assigned full-time to completing the analysis of the Twin Towers collapse. Once the 10,000-page final report on WTC 1 and 2 was released at the end of October 2005, investigators spent 3 years testing hypotheses about the collapse of Building 7. When the final report was released in November 2008, conspiracy theorists had ample opportunity for speculation. As investigators grappled with a collapse that made architectural history, conspiracists struggled just as mightily to concoct a valid motivation for the government to have destroyed the building. Researchers have been forced to speculate about the motives for including WTC 7 in the 9/11 destruction, writes Ronald Blyer at the Demographic, Environmental, and Security Issues Project website. I joined many in the 9/11 inquiry movement who find it plausible that housed the command center for the destruction of the Twin Towers, as well as a homing device bringing the planes to their targets. Many think that the building was brought down to destroy the equipment and the computers involved in the conspiracy. Other theories center on leaseholder Larry Silverstein trying to collect insurance money, or shadowy figures plotting to destroy case files at the SEC. Whatever the storyline, however, conspiracy theorists almost universally agree on one thing. The building, they say, was brought down with pre-planted explosives through a controlled demolition. In the case of WTC 7, there could be no doubt that all the columns, or most of the columns must, have been severed simultaneously, writes Frank Legg, one of the independent researchers and scholars for 9/11 Truth and Justice. The reality, according to investigators, is simultaneously less complicated and even more remarkable: fire and debris damage. Claimed 7 hours after the second Twin Tower fell, WTC 7 collapsed. The 47-story building housed offices for the Secret Service and CIA, among others, and was therefore, conspiracists say, a repository of secrets and evidence that needed to be destroyed. Many researchers believe that shadowy elements within the agencies housed in WTC 7 are prime suspects in this sprawling conspiracy. If they are correct, Building 7 was literally a nest of suspicious activity, and its remaining intact may well have been a catastrophe. For those who were counting on its destruction, wrote Jeremy Baker on the website www.serendipity.ly. How did these shadowy elements engineer the collapse? As with the Twin Towers, conspiracy theorists see evidence of a controlled demolition. According to the website www.jesus-is-savior.com, no combination of debris damage, fuel tank explosions, and fires could inflict the kind of simultaneous damage to all the building's columns required to make the building implode. In fact, the collapse of WTC 7 was initially puzzling to investigators, but they are now convinced the building failed primarily as a result of the long-burning fires in its interior. This conclusion is a modification of NIST's initial hypothesis, released as part of its June 2004 progress report on the federal building and fire safety investigation of the World Trade Center disaster, which attributed the collapse at least partly to destruction on the south side of the tower. The most important thing we found was that there was, in fact, physical damage to the south face of Building 7. NIST's Shyam Sunder told Popular Mechanics at the time. On about a third of the face to the center and to the bottom, approximately 10 stories, about 25% of the depth of the building was scooped out. A 3-year investigation by the agency has now shown, however, that the tower's collapse was initiated by the expansion of steel beams in the fires, and that WTC-7 would have probably collapsed regardless of the debris damage. That said, the fatal fires wouldn't have started without the debris damage. A seismology report prepared at Columbia University notes that the collapses of the Twin Towers caused little ground instability, but nevertheless discharged a massive amount of energy, as much as 107 joules in the kinetic energy of dust and debris. Except for temperature, the effect was similar to the energy contained in the pyroclastic ash given off in volcanic eruptions. Only a very small portion of them was converted into seismic waves, the report states. Most of the energy went into the deformation of buildings and the formation of rubble and dust. The fires that doomed Building 7 began with burning debris from the North Tower at about 10:28 a.m. They started small, single cubicle fires on at least 10 separate floors on the south and southwest of the building. Adjacent cubicles caught fire, followed by cubicle clusters across aisles, ignited by thermal radiation from the flames. Offices were superheated until various surfaces reached their auto-ignition temperatures and burst into flames, a process known as flashover. The radiated heat spread fire to adjacent offices and down the halls. Unlike in Towers 1 and 2, the majority of the building's fireproofing was still intact when the burn began. The primary and backup water supplies for the building's sprinkler systems, however, were effectively eliminated by the collapse of the Twin Towers, which damaged water lines. On floors 7 through 9 and 11 through 13 in WTC 7, the fires began burning out of control. Most of the floors in WTC 7 had combustible fuel loads, cubicle walls, desks, bookshelves, and paperwork of roughly 4 pounds per square foot, equivalent to what was found in WTC 1 and 2. On floors 11 and 12, which were occupied by the SEC, NIST's investigative team estimated fuel loads 50% higher due to a higher density of paper materials. That was critical. In WTC 7, there was no jet fuel to incite a blaze, the way there was in the Twin Towers. Instead, the fires grew from one workstation to another, until by 4 p.m. they concentrated on the northeast corner of the building. This was important to the collapse. The top 40 floors of WTC 7 were supported by interior columns and 58 perimeter columns. 21 of those interior columns formed a rectangular building core. The remaining 3 interior columns, numbered 79, 80, and 81, were offset to the east and were larger in diameter because they supported long floor spans on that side of the building. The fires in WTC 7 generally burned at lower temperatures than in the north and south towers. Some pockets reached 593 degrees Celsius, comparable to WTC 1 and 2, but the fires mostly peaked around 299 degrees Celsius. They weakened the steel beams and columns somewhat, but had another, more profound impact. The heat caused 30-foot steel beams that supported the floors in the northeast corner to expand 0.000065 inches per inch of original length for each degree Fahrenheit, a process known as thermal expansion. Anyone who has run a tight jar lid underwater to help loosen it knows that the metal expands when it gets hot, Sunder says. Heat also causes steel to lose strength and stiffness. But thermal expansion occurs at temperatures much lower than those required to reduce steel's strength and stiffness. At that coefficient of expansion, a 50-foot steel beam increases in length by inches, more than 1/3 of an inch, for every increase of 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Based on the temperatures inside WTC 7, key floor beams increased in length by more than 4.25 inches in the northeast section of the building. At floor 13, that expansion sheared the bolts that connected column 79, in the northeast corner of the building's interior, to the girder reaching across to column 44 on the tower's north face. At approximately 5:20 p.m., continued expansion pushed the girder entirely off the seat, holding it against column 79, sending floor 13 collapsing onto the floors below. A cascade of floor failures followed, according to NIST, leaving column 79, which supported approximately 2,000 square feet of floor space, with insufficient lateral support between floors 5 and 14. The weight of the 33 floors above buckled column 79 eastward, beginning a progressive collapse of the upper floors on the northeast corner. The sudden load redistribution, coupled with debris damage from the falling floors, buckled nearby columns 80 and 81, according to NIST, initiating an east-to-west chain reaction of interior column failures. With the core in ruins, load redistribution from the gutted building buckled the exterior columns between floors 7 and 14 and brought down the exterior of the tower. NIST's final analysis, of course, differs from what the agency first suggested to popular mechanics in 2004. 2 years earlier, FEMA first hypothesized in its World Trade Center building performance study that WTC-7 collapsed almost exclusively due to the fires. The conspiracy movement eased on this assertion, noting that there were no other examples of large iron-protected steel buildings collapsing because of fire alone. When NIST's final report agreed that this was the first known instance of the total collapse of a tall building primarily due to fires, conspiracists pounced again. At www.globalresearch.ca, David Ray Griffin wrote, "If NIST did engage in fraudulent science, this would not be particularly surprising. NIST is an agency of the U.S. Department of Commerce. During the years it was writing its World Trade Center reports, therefore, it was an agency of the Bush-Cheney administration." Sunder prefers to focus on the evidence gathered by an investigative team that included 13 NIST investigators, 59 technical staffers, 15 special experts and consultants, contractors from the private sector, and a 10-person advisory committee of college professors, independent architects, and directors of energy and hazards research centers who provided technical advice. The public should really recognize the science is really behind what we have said, Sunder concluded. The obvious stares you in the face, wreckage pile. Astronomical that if the fire could weaken the support structures of the WTC-7 enough to fail, that it happened to cause the building to collapse inwards and fall straight down on its own footprint, just like a controlled implosion is designed to do? Questions, Killtown, review.org. Other claims distort legitimate information to come to the same conclusion. At the website www.howstuffworks.com, contributing writer Tom Harris put together a primer on controlled demolition with the help of industry expert Brent Blanchard, the operations manager for Protect Documentation Services, which performs vibration consulting and photographic documentation for contractors throughout the world. As an easy visual, they compared one type of demolition to a tree falling in the woods. The main challenge in bringing a building down is controlling which way it falls, Harris wrote. Tipping a building over is something like felling a tree. To topple the building to the north, the blasters detonate explosives on the north side of the building first, in the same way you would chop into a tree from the north side if you wanted it to fall in that direction. The article, published in June 2001, further notes, sometimes, though, a building is surrounded by structures that must be preserved. In this case, the blasters proceed with a true implosion, demolishing the building so that it collapses straight down into its own footprint. This feat requires such skill that only a handful of demolition companies in the world will attempt it. The analysis provided unintended fodder for conspiracy theorists. In his paper, Why Indeed Did the WTC Buildings Collapse? Stephen Jones quotes the passage, then writes, why would terrorists undertake straight-line collapses of WTC-7 and the towers when, toppling over, falls would? Require much less work and would do much more damage in downtown Manhattan. And where would they obtain the necessary skills and access to the buildings for a symmetrical implosion anyway? He concludes, Building 7's collapse into its footprint provides strong evidence for an inside job fact, according to NIST's exhaustive computer simulations. By the time the exterior of the building collapsed, the dramatic event memorialized in dozens of online videos, much of the collapse had already taken place, out of the view of TV cameras. Inside the building, the eastward buckling of column 79 began a progressive collapse of the upper floor sleeting to the visible kink in the roofline as the east penthouse descended into the building. The sudden load redistribution, coupled with debris damage from the falling floors, buckled nearby columns 80 and 81. All the floor connections to these three columns, as well as to the exterior columns, failed, and the floors fell on the east side of the building, states the NIST report. The exterior facade on the east quarter of the building was just a hollow shell. The chain reaction of interior column failures led to a buckling of the building's core. When the weight of the collapsing building suddenly shifted to the exterior columns, those supports buckled between floors 7 and 14. The entire building shell above collapsed as a single unit. What you're seeing is an interior collapse, then to the outside, Saunders says. What you're getting is an impression of a controlled demolition, but it's not. Meanwhile, Blanchard says that conspiracy theorists have misappropriated his example of felling a tree for multiple reasons. WTC-7 was 330 feet long at its maximum and 140 feet wide. Unlike tipping a tree a few feet in diameter, tipping WTC-7 would have required deflecting the building more than 70 feet north or south before its center of gravity moved beyond its base, an incomprehensible margin, particularly because WTC-7 sustained no external lateral forces. The office tower's interconnected frame would help prevent movement that drastic. When one column or beam is compromised, it's going to pull on the rest of the structure, not just shear off, Blanchard says. Tipping something like Building 7 just can't be done. Secondly, Blanchard estimates the interior of WTC-7 was some 80 to 90% air. Once thousands of tons of steel beams and concrete flooring began to collapse, Blanchard says, the structure had too much inertia to go in any other direction. Trees are inherently rigid, monolithic structures, Blanchard states. A radio tower could be felled like a tree. You could begin a building's descent in a certain direction by cutting certain columns, but you cannot fell a building like a tree. Furthermore, claims of a tidy collapse ignore obvious evidence. The borough of Manhattan Community College's Fetterman Hall is located across the street from WTC-7, some 150 feet northwest of the tower. The 15-story steel and concrete classroom building sustained such structural damage from the collapse of WTC-7 that it was ultimately scheduled for demolition. The 32-story Verizon building, located due west of Building 7, suffered extensive damage to its east face when its neighbor collapsed. It cost the phone company 4 years and $322 million to restore the building. Much like with the collapses of the Twin Towers, conspiracy theorists count seconds on grainy news footage and suggest that if the 610-foot-tall WTC-7 collapsed at close to freefall speed, pre-planted explosives must have removed any interior resistance. At the website www.garlicandgrass.org, which describes itself as a grassroots journal of America's political soul, conspiracy theorist Dave Heller writes, shortly after 5:20 p.m. on Sept. 11, as the horrific day was coming to a close, WTC-7 mysteriously imploded and fell to the ground in an astounding 6.5 seconds. A rock drop from the 47th floor would have taken at least 6 seconds to hit the ground. WTC-7 in its entirety fell to the earth in 6.5 seconds. He finishes, judge for yourself. Watch WTC-7 go down. It takes 6.5 seconds. Take out your stopwatch. NIST required more precise measurements than those afforded by a stopwatch and an internet connection. The agency analyzed video footage of the collapse down to the individual pixel on the building's perimeter, noting any shift in brightness that would indicate movement. The moment the east penthouse descended, the clock started. 6.9 seconds later, the exterior began to fall. The instant of initial movement was estimated by analyzing changes in the color of a pixel in the video recording over time. A single pixel close to the center of the north face roofline was selected, and the color of the pixel, expressed as values of hue, saturation, and brightness, was recorded for each frame. The brightness was found to provide the best indicator of change, since the brightness of a pixel representing the sky above the building had a value of 100%, while a pixel representing the roofline of the building had a brightness of roughly 60% for the pixel selected. NIST charted the building's collapse as it fell 18 stories, until the roofline disappeared behind neighboring high-rises. The agency separated the visible collapse into 3 distinct sections. Stage 1, which lasted 1.75 seconds, corresponds to the initial buckling of the outside columns and the start of the north face's descent. In stage 2, lasting 2.25 seconds, the building's shell fell 8 stories, or 105 feet, in a free-fall drop. NIST agrees that the exterior fell at gravitational acceleration during the stage, noting that the columns provided negligible support to the upper portion of the north face. In stage 3, the upper section of the building encountered resistance from the debris pile below, and it took 1.4 seconds for the northwest corner to fall 130 feet and vanish from view. The collapse time was approximately 40% longer than that of freefall for the first 18 stories of descent, the report concluded. The detailed analysis shows that this increase in time is due primarily to stage 1, in which column buckling was just beginning, and gradual increases in displacement and velocity were observed. NIST also showed that conspiracy theories championing controlled demolition overlooked 2 key gaps in their argument. First, a blast in an office building would be virtually guaranteed to explode windows. Conspiracy buffs claim as much when they speculate that window shards ejected from the Twin Towers are proof of explosives. Using ShellMRC, a computer program that models explosive detonations, NIST found that affixing 9 pounds of RDX explosive to column 79, which weighed approximately 1,000 pounds per foot, could have theoretically led to the overall destruction of WTC-7 witnessed on September 11th. But even beyond the logical leap that supposes no building tenants witnessed the removal of column enclosures, or workers with welding torches cutting column sections, or the placement of wires for detonation, there's a problem with the theory. Shamrock simulations showed that nearly every window on the northeast corner of the floor would have been blown out. Photographic evidence from September 11th doesn't show that damage. Finally, that hypothetical blast event would have had another unmistakable sign. The sound of a massive explosion would have rattled through the corridors of the financial district. Using NLAWS, a sound wave propagation program developed by the Air Force, NIST found that any blast capable of bringing down WTC-7 would have registered one. 130 to 140 decibels, more than half a mile away from the tower, almost the distance across the Hudson River to New Jersey. This sound level is consistent with standing next to a jet plane engine, and more than 10 times louder than being in front of the speakers at a rock concert, NIST has stated. Soundtracks from videos being recorded at the time of the collapse did not contain any sound as intense as would have accompanied such a blast. Therefore, the investigation team concluded that there was no demolition-type blast that would have been intense enough to lead to the collapse of WTC-7 on September 11, 2000. And one, Silverstein's Pullet, quote, conspiracy theorists claim that real estate developer Larry Silverstein, who leased WTC-7 from the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, admits in a 2002 PBS documentary to intentionally bring down the building. In this film, America Rebuilds, A Year at Ground Zero, Silverstein talks about the WTC-7 collapse. I remember getting a call from the ER fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire, and I said, "We've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it." And they made that decision to pull, and we watched the building collapse. Later in the documentary, a weary firefighter at Ground Zero notes, "We're getting ready to pull Building 6. Taken in combination, these comments lead conspiracy theorists to believe that in saying pull it, Silverstein was authorizing the demolition of WTC-7. An article on the 9/11 Truth Movement in New York Magazine put it this way: pull it, as truth people never tire of repeating, is a term usually used for controlled demolition. In fact, 5 demolition and engineering experts told Popular Mechanics that pull it is not slang for controlled demolition. "I've never heard of it," said John Magnuson of Magnuson Klemenchuk Associates. Ron Dokel, retired president of Olshan Demolishing Company, said the same thing. Mark Loiseau of Controlled Demolition Inc. added that the only way he could imagine the term being used is in reference to a process where the legs of a structure are pre-cut and attached to cables, and then large machines are used literally to pull the building to the ground. But he said this is only done with radio towers and relatively small buildings. There is no way you could pull over structures like the Loiseau wrote in an email to Popular Mechanics. The contractors removing the debris tried on several occasions to pull over sections of that were damaged by the fire and the collapse. Brent Blanchard's team from Protect Documentation Services was at Ground Zero in late autumn 2001, photographing the cleanup efforts. He documented WTC-6 being pulled. The building was pulled in a series of 3 sections, he says. The frame was pre-cut into pieces so it could fall uniformly. The sections were pulled down by cables attached to the booms of excavators. According to an analysis of the collapse that Blanchard wrote in 2006, we can say with certainty that a similar operation would have been logistically impossible at Ground Zero on 9/11, physically impossible for a building the size of WTC-7, and the structure did not collapse in that manner anyway. Silverstein released a statement on September 5, 2005, saying his comments were misinterpreted. He said he was referring to his desire to pull a squadron of firefighters from the building. The statement read in part, Mr. Silverstein expressed his view that the most important thing was to protect the safety of those firefighters, including, if necessary, to have them withdraw from the building. Firefighters contacted by Popular Mechanics confirmed that pull is a common firefighting term for removing personnel from a dangerous structure. In addition, NIST is definitive on this count. Shyam Sunder began his August 2008 press conference announcing the agency's findings with this. Before I tell you what we found, I'd like to tell you what we did not find. We did not find any evidence that explosives were used to bring the building down. The death of Barry Jennings. Claim on September 11th, Barry Jennings was one of the few people rushing into Building 7. As administrative superintendent for the New York City Housing Authority's Emergency Services Department, he headed to the Office of Emergency Management, housed on the 23rd floor. Jennings and Michael Hess, who led the New York City Law Department as corporation counsel and also reported to the OEM, were the last 2 people evacuated from the tower. In 2007, Jennings, the father of four, gave an interview to the producers of Loose Change, alleging that he heard explosions in Building 7 before it collapsed. "I'm just confused about why World Trade Center 7 went down in the first place," he says on camera. "I know what I heard. I heard explosions." In that instant, Jennings became conspiracy theorist's sole eyewitness for a Building 7 controlled demolition scenario. Jennings' interview demolishes official version, declared a headline at www.infowars.com. NIST's analysis of the emergency response at the World Trade Center alludes to Jennings' story and provides a timeline suggesting the explosions he heard were actually the collapse of WTC-1 roughly 300 feet away, along with the subsequent debris damage to Building 7. Jennings backed off his claims during a 2008 interview with the BBC, saying he didn't like the way it was portrayed in the film. He added, "I didn't appreciate that, so I told them to pull my interview." What is certain, however, is that on August 19, 2008, 2 days before NIST released its final report on Building 7, Jennings died at the age of 53. Speculation about a government hit began almost immediately. In every major cover-up from the JFK assassination to Iran-Contra, we can see one common threat: the untimely death of eyewitnesses, wrote radio host Jack Blood at DeadlineLive.info. Barry Jennings was not only an important and most credible eyewitness, but he openly refuted much of the government and media version of events. He was a liability. Further, the website www.jenningsmystery.com issued a challenge to American journalism. No cause of death has been made public, and the mainstream press has not even covered the death of this American hero. The theory added another layer when Dylan Avery, the director of Loose Change, made an April 2009 appearance on Blood's radio show. Avery claimed he had looked into Jennings' death and discovered really creepy things. The Jennings' former home on Long Island, he said, was now vacant and abandoned. Avery added that he'd even hired a private investigator to look into the cause of death. A little less than 24 hours later, got a response back that said, pretty much word for word, "Due to some of the information I have uncovered, I have determined this is a job for the police. I have refunded your credit card. Please do not contact me ever again about this individual." Blood summarized the situation this way: "If I'm looking at this from an objective point of view, I think something really stinks here. I'd like to think that all of my listeners and anyone out there who is passionate about what really happened on 9/11 would really want to get to the bottom of this. In fact, Barry Jennings Jr. won't ever forget the day he turned 19. His birthday was spent," he says, "at Stony Brook University Hospital on Long Island, watching over his father. Barry Sr. lost his battle with leukemia the next day. I still hurt every time someone says the government killed him," Jennings Jr. wrote in an online chat room, defending his father's legacy. "It is insulting to me." According to Jennings Jr., nearly 20 years earlier, Barry Sr.'s twin brother Larry died from the same disease. "There's no conspiracy here," says Howard Martyr, who worked with Barry Sr. at the Housing Authority. "This disease hit him, and bam, he was suddenly gone. A great guy was taken from us." Martyr, who was a spokesman for the organization before retiring in November 2009, was drawn into the maelstrom when he responded to a request from www.infowars.com reporter Aaron Dykes to verify Jennings' passing. A spokesperson for the Housing Authority has now confirmed his death, after weeks of rumors circulating online, Dykes wrote, but refused to give any further details. Martyr wonders exactly what they expected. "As soon as he died, conspiracy theorists started calling me from all over the world," he told Popular Mechanics. "I really didn't want to give out any information, except to say, please leave his family alone while they grieve." Barry Jr., his brother Gerald, and Barry's widow, Sheba, all declined repeated interview requests from Popular Mechanics. But unlike conspiracy theories about stand-down orders or seismic readings, the sometimes public struggles of the Jennings family over the past 2 years offer perspective on the human toll of the rumor-mongering. Imagine watching a loved one die, then having conspiracy theorists suggest, "Now, let's consider the CIA's capacity to assassinate." Barry Jennings, and make the cause of death appear to be a heart attack, as did one commenter at 911blogger.com. Or having conspiracists dismiss his entire existence as a sham, as a commenter did at the Reality Shack forums when he wrote, "Barry Jennings is about as real as James Bond. The result was predictable. I guess my father really was a hero, huh?" Jennings Jr. wrote in a biting response at wecanchangetheworld.wordpress.com, "I will admit, watching him die at 53, the day after my birthday, in Stony Brook Hospital from leukemia, wasn't the highlight of my life. Losing my father at 19 wasn't my plan." Jennings Jr.'s fiancée, Dominique Austin, even entered the fray. Barry Jennings didn't die because of the government. Okay? She wrote in a forum at www.topics.com, "I've seen everything. You guys didn't see anything. We both stood by his father's side when he was sick and when he died. So talk what you know and not what you don't know." Austin tells Popular Mechanics that Jennings Sr.'s death hit her fiancé particularly hard. "Barry Jr. stopped being himself," she says. "For a while, he pushed everyone away. He pushed me away. He doesn't want to talk about it and risk going down that road again." After 6 years with Barry Jr., she says she too feels the loss. "Barry Sr. was a great father," she says. "I looked forward to having him as a father-in-law. Sadly, things continued downhill for the Jennings family after Barry Sr.'s death." In a biography on his MySpace page, Barry Jr. wrote that about 5 years ago, Sheba was stricken with an unknown disease that limited her mobility and strength. The ancillary result of his father's death, the bio says, was his mother being sent to a nursing home in upstate New York and Barry losing his home. According to public court records, the mortgage holder foreclosed the Jennings' Long Island home in August 2009. That's why Avery found the house empty. Sheba lives today in South Carolina. As evidenced by the declined interviews, the Jennings family seems most interested in putting the past behind them. "It's upsetting for all of us that people keep telling these lies," Austin says. "They don't know the real story. She and Jennings Jr. live together in Long Island, where he's trying to launch a music career and ignore the conspiracy theorists. As screwed up as our government may be, at least I can say that they didn't kill my father, he wrote at, because I watched him die. He concluded with the note, I'm tired of speaking up. You can believe what you want to, minimal wreckage to study. Claim the collapses of the buildings left an estimated 1.8 million tons of concrete, steel, and other debris at the World Trade Center site. Much of it was cleared quickly, however, and the minimal amount of wreckage of WTC-7 available for later investigation has generated speculation. Some conspiracists point to the fast removal of debris as evidence of a government cover-up. The columns were in pieces big enough to ship in a dump truck, which is what happened, writes one truther at www.debate.org. The WTC wreckage was shipped overseas to China before any experts could even examine. Would experts not want to analyze the three biggest structural failures in the history of the world? In the 8 months following 9/11, workers moved more than fact, 108,000 truckloads of debris to the Fresh Kills landfill on Staten Island, New York. There, close to 1 billion individual pieces of debris were sorted by law enforcement officials as part of the largest forensic investigation in U.S. history. There has been some concern expressed by others that the work of the team has been hampered because debris was removed from the site and has subsequently been processed for recycling, Gene Corley told the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Science in March 2002. This is not the case. The team has had full access to the scrapyards and to the site and has been able to obtain numerous samples. At this point, there is no indication that having access to each piece of steel from the World Trade Center would make a significant difference to understanding the performance of the structures. NIST investigators examined 236 pieces of steel from the wreckage of Towers 1 and 2, though Sham Sunder admits that WTC-7 wreckage was more difficult to study. Hundreds of investigators at the salvage yards found that the Twin Tower steel columns were labeled and numbered, but columns from buildings 5, 6, and 7 were not. In general, much less evidence existed for WTC-7 than for the two WTC towers, the agency reported. The steel for WTC-1 and WTC-2 contained distinguishing characteristics that enabled it to be identified once removed from the site during recovery efforts. However, the same was not true for the WTC-7 steel. Certainly, there is a lot less visual and audio evidence of the WTC-7 collapse compared to the collapses of the WTC-1 and WTC-2 towers, which were much more widely photographed. NIST relied upon extensive interviews, schematics, studies of the building, and audio and video recordings to analyze fire dynamics and create computer models of WTC-7's collapse. The agency used a program called ANSYS to model events that caused the collapse, and LS-DYNA, which creates fluid 3D models often used to simulate automobile crashes or the effects of bird strikes in jet engines, to study the behavior of the building's frame during the failure. Due to the nonlinearities in the analysis, as well as sequential local failures, a 25-second analysis took up to 8 weeks to complete, the report states. NIST added, considerable effort was expended to compile evidence and to determine whether intentionally set explosives might have caused the collapse of WTC-7. Studying steel from Building 7 might have benefited investigators, though Sunder isn't surprised that in the chaotic days following the collapses, labeling scrap metal wasn't the top priority. At the time, we were concerned about terrorists who attacked our country and search and rescue operations, he says. I think the fact that they didn't collect was the least important activity that happened that day. In 2002, New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who graduated from Owens Hopkins University with a degree in electrical engineering, threw his support behind the cleanup effort, saying, if you want to take a look at the construction methods and the design, that's in this day and age what computers do. Just looking at a piece of metal generally doesn't tell you anything. 200,000 tons of salvaged steel from Ground Zero Hewlett's Way to multiple places, from scrapyards to warships. News Service reported that Shanghai Bao Steel Group tons of scrap WTC steel from a New Jersey company. The Indian Steel Alliance, an association of major in, estimates that scrap processing companies across the more than 55,000 tons of the WTC steel debris, which everything from kitchen utensils to college buildings. The Navy's 684-foot-long USS New York, which was come November 2009, carries 7.5 tons of the recycled steel in its, there are still about 1,000 objects from the World Trade in the 80,000-square-foot Hangar 17 at John F. Kennedy Airport, according to Stephen Weintraub, a consultant to the preservation of 9/11 artifacts. They range from train cars to 50-ton steel columns. The Port Authority has 1,000 requests from municipalities and nonprofit organizations. They include the artifacts and local 9/11 memorial.